The exam stopped itself when it realized the quiet kid was not trying to survive it anymore. That was the first thing we saw from the observation chamber. Sentinel-9 flashing red across every wall display, warning tones stacking over each other, and Caleb Walker standing alone in the simulated storm like he had finally found a place that made sense. His uniform was soaked. His dark hair clung to his forehead. Mud streaked one sleeve. The wind inside the Deathworld simulator hit hard enough to make most cadets drop to one knee, but Caleb barely moved. He just stood there, shoulders low, eyes scanning the black tree line, breathing slow through his nose. Above him, the system projection stuttered, then printed a message none of us had ever seen during an academy exam. Student Caleb Walker is no longer classified as participant. Reclassifying as environmental threat. Nobody spoke. Not Professor Howren Voss. Not Brack Thalen, who had spent all semester calling Caleb a background species. Not even me. My name is Vera Sol, and I was assigned to observe the exam for comparative survival studies, which sounded impressive until the human made our entire curriculum look like a brochure written indoors. Caleb had been the easiest student in the class to ignore. He sat in the back left seat, 5 feet 10 inches, pale skin, gray eyes, plain academy jacket, quiet hands, quiet voice, quiet everything. When instructors asked questions, he answered only if called on. When cadets argued about rankings, he packed his bag and left. When Brack joked that humans were only dangerous in groups, Caleb had looked up once and said, "Depends on the weather," then gone back to sharpening a pencil with a pocket tool he was technically not supposed to have. We thought that was awkward. Later, I would understand it was a warning delivered too politely for aliens to survive. The Deathworld exam was supposed to expose weakness. That was the point. Sentinel-9 built a hostile environment from thousands of known planetary hazards: cold rain, unstable ground, low visibility, false rescue beacons, predator calls, shifting terrain, and time pressure. The strongest cadets treated it like a contest. Caleb treated it like a memory. In the observation chamber, Professor Voss kept asking why he was not following the bright evacuation markers. Sentinel-9 kept answering with stranger and stranger data. Human subject declining obvious route. Human subject ignoring distress audio. Human subject reducing movement profile. Human subject detecting artificial wind inconsistency. Then the simulator tried to herd him toward the North Ridge, and Caleb stopped so suddenly that even the rain seemed to miss him. He looked up at the wrong sky, listened to thunder that was not quite thunder, and smiled. Not happily. Not proudly. More like someone hearing a cheap imitation of a song from home. Then he whispered into the storm, "Your rain is lying." Sentinel-9 froze for 0.7 seconds. That was the moment the exam began to fear him. Before the simulator panicked, Caleb Walker had been almost invisible. That was what made the whole thing embarrassing. We had spent 8 weeks sharing classrooms, labs, cafeteria tables, and field drills with the human, and somehow most of us could not describe him beyond quiet. Not weak, exactly. Just quiet in a way that made stronger species comfortable. He did not challenge Brack Thalen when Brack took the center seat during tactical briefings. He did not correct Soren when Soren claimed humans only survived on Earth because they hid in houses. He did not even react when Professor Voss used him as an example of low-threat mammalian design during comparative anatomy. Caleb just sat in the back left seat with his notebook open, writing in small straight lines, looking like a student who would rather disappear than defend his own species. I thought he was shy. That was my first mistake. Brack thought he was scared. That was worse. The morning of the Deathworld exam, the whole class gathered outside Simulator Hall 3, where the Academy ran survival evaluations too expensive and humiliating to perform outdoors. The doors were black glass, the kind that reflected your face badly enough to make everyone look guilty. Above them, Sentinel-9's emblem glowed in blue: adaptive environmental assessment, live response scoring, no instructor. Intervention unless catastrophic. Brack loved that last part. No instructor intervention, he said, rolling his massive shoulders. Try not to get lost in the fake bushes, Walker. A few cadets laughed. Caleb looked up from tying his boot. Are there bushes? Brack blinked. What? Caleb tightened the knot, then stood. You said fake bushes. I was asking if you knew the biome. That killed the laughter for about half a second, which was a personal record for our class. Brack recovered with a snort. It is a Deathworld exam. It will be unpleasant. That is the point. Caleb nodded like unpleasant was not useful information. He looked toward the sealed doors, then toward the air vents above them. I noticed him do it that time. Not because I was clever, but because his silence had changed. He was no longer avoiding attention. He was collecting details. Professor Helen Voss arrived in his formal evaluation coat, carrying a tablet and the calm expression of a man who trusted machines too much. Today's exam will measure adaptation under pressure, he announced. You will face weather instability, terrain disruption, false signals, limited visibility, and simulated predator presence. The objective is simple: reach the extraction point before time expires. Several cadets straightened. Caleb raised one hand. Slowly. Professor Voss looked almost surprised. Yes, Mr. Walker? Caleb glanced at the simulator doors again. How real is the rain? The class laughed harder than before. Even I smiled, because it sounded absurd. Of all possible questions, he asked about rain. Professor Voss gave him a patient look. Real enough to be uncomfortable. Caleb did not smile. That was not what I asked? Sentinel-9's blue emblem flickered once above the door. At the time, I thought it was a lighting glitch. Now I think the system had just noticed him noticing it. The Deathworld exam had a reputation before any of us stepped inside it. Older cadets talked about it in the cafeteria with the false casual tone people use when they are still embarrassed by their own memories. One said the cold made his joints lock before the first checkpoint. Another claimed the false rescue beacon sounded exactly like his hatched brother calling from the dark. Brack insisted those stories were exaggerated, which meant he had heard them too and disliked the possibility that fear might be standardized across species. Professor Voss loved the exam because it was clean. No real cliff faces. No real storms. No real predators. Just a controlled environment built to measure survival response under pressure. That phrase sounded reassuring until the doors opened and the simulator swallowed us. The air changed first. Warm academy oxygen vanished behind us, replaced by a wet, metallic chill that crawled under my collar. Rain fell in hard diagonal sheets, not gentle droplets, but cold needles driven by wind. The ground beneath our boots was black mud broken by jagged stone ridges and thin gray trees that bent without snapping. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 feet. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled through the artificial sky with a low, uneven rhythm that made my chest tighten. Sentinel-9's voice came through our wristbands, smooth and cheerful. Assessment begins now. Reach extraction before time expires. Trust your training. Brack grinned at that. He always trusted training, mostly because training usually trusted him back. A bright orange beacon pulsed through the rain to the north, blinking in a steady pattern that screamed safety to every panicked instinct in the class. Soren pointed immediately. Extraction marker. Brack nodded. Move. Most of the cadets followed at once, heads low, arms up against the rain, eager to turn the frightening environment into a race. I took 2 steps with them before noticing Caleb had not moved. He stood near the starting ridge, one hand held slightly away from his side, palm open to the rain. His head tilted. His eyes were not on the beacon. They were on the mud. Walker! Brack shouted. Wrong direction. Caleb crouched, pressed 2 fingers into the wet ground, then rubbed the mud between them. It is too warm, he said. Soren laughed over the wind. The mud is too warm? That is your concern? Caleb stood and looked toward the orange beacon. Rain is cold. Ground runoff should be colder near the slope. This is vent heat. None of us answered because none of us had thought to ask the mud for its opinion. Brack made an impatient sound. The beacon is visible. We go to the beacon. Caleb's voice stayed flat. That is why it is wrong. Then, from the gray trees beyond the beacon, came a soft chiming tone. The kind emergency systems used to promise shelter. The kind frightened students want to believe. Caleb's shoulders lowered by half an inch. Not fear. Recognition. Do not follow the light, he said. Brack rolled his eyes and marched north. 3 cadets followed him. 5 seconds later, the ground beneath the beacon shifted into a harmless but humiliating containment pit, and Sentinel-9 politely announced. First decision penalty recorded. Caleb did not smile. He only turned west, into the darker part of the storm, and said, Shelter is where the system does not want us to look. The west path looked wrong to everyone except Caleb Walker, which was becoming a theme. It had no beacon, no clear trail, no helpful emergency tone, and no comforting academy marker telling us we were making the correct educational choice. It was just a narrow break between black stone ridges where the rain fell harder, and the gray trees leaned together like they were sharing bad news. Brack was still climbing out of the containment pit with his pride making more noise than his boots, so the rest of us hesitated. Nobody wanted to follow the quiet human into the darkest part of the simulator. Nobody wanted to admit the quiet human had been right in the first minute either. Caleb solved the problem by not waiting for permission. He moved west with short, careful steps, keeping one hand near the rock wall and his eyes on the ground ahead. Not fast. Not slow. Efficient. Walker, Soren called, trying to sound annoyed instead of nervous. Extraction is north. Caleb did not look back. The trap was north. That does not mean west is safe. Did not say safe. That was the entire answer. Somehow it made me follow him. Maybe because the storm felt louder near the beacon. Maybe because Sentinel-9 had stopped giving helpful instructions the moment Caleb ignored it. Or maybe because his calm had weight. Not confidence. Confidence performs for witnesses. Caleb's calm did not care whether anyone saw it. He paused at the first stone shelf and held up 2 fingers. Stop. No speech, just a gesture. The cadets behind him almost collided because we were not used to taking silent orders from someone we had spent weeks overlooking. Caleb crouched beside a shallow stream of rainwater cutting through the mud. He dipped one finger into it, then tasted a drop from his knuckle before any of us could react. Soren made a disgusted sound. Did you just taste simulator runoff? Caleb nodded once. Mineral profile is off. Brack, finally caught up and coated in mud, snapped. It is fake water. Caleb glanced at him. Fake water still has a source. Then he pointed at the stream. It flowed west to east, but the rain was driving east to west. A small contradiction. Tiny. Easy to ignore. Exactly the kind of thing a frightened cadet would never notice while chasing bright lights. Caleb followed the stream uphill instead of down. That made no sense until the trees thinned and we found a low overhang tucked behind a curtain of hanging roots, dry enough to shelter 6 students and hidden from the open ridge. Sentinel-9 spoke through our wristbands. Unmarked shelter discovered. Adaptive scoring updated. Brack stared at the overhang like it had insulted him personally. Caleb stepped inside first, checked the ceiling, checked the ground, then checked the shadows. Only then did he wave us in. 5 minutes here, he said. Get warm. No talking above a whisper. Soren folded his arms. Why are you giving orders? Caleb looked out into the rain. His voice stayed quiet. Because something heard us fall in the pit. The storm answered with a distant sound from the north ridge, low and patterned, almost like an animal call, almost like the simulator wanted us to know it was still playing. Caleb's eyes changed again. He was not scared. He was listening. Caleb Walker did not become louder when the simulated predator called from the ridge. That was the moment I finally understood we had misunderstood his silence from the beginning. Brack reacted first, because Brack reacted to everything like. Volume was a leadership skill. It is a sound cue. He whispered too loudly from the back of the overhang. The system wants us to panic. Caleb turned his head just enough to look at him. Then stop helping it. Brack's mouth opened, then closed, which may have been the first recorded survival benefit of human bluntness. Outside, the rain shifted direction. Not much. Maybe 10 degrees. Enough to push the mist away from the shelter entrance, and carry our scent east along the stone shelf. Caleb noticed before Sentinel-9 announced anything. He pressed one hand flat against the mud near the entrance, then lifted it and studied the wet grit stuck to his palm. His breathing slowed. His shoulders lowered. His eyes stopped looking like a student's eyes. They became something older, something that measured distance, cover, wind, sound, and fear without asking permission from education. Soren whispered, "Why does he look different?" I had no answer. Caleb had not grown taller. He had not changed shape. He had not displayed claws or armor or venom or any of the visible things civilized species like to label as danger. He simply stopped wasting movement. Every part of him seemed to serve a purpose. Even stillness. Especially stillness. Sentinel-9's voice came through our wristbands. Simulated predator proximity increasing. Recommended action, proceed toward marked secondary beacon. A pale blue light appeared beyond the trees to the south, soft and comforting, blinking at an easy pace. Brack started to rise. Caleb caught his sleeve without looking at him. Not hard. Just enough. No. Brack looked down at the human hand on his uniform like it had committed treason. The system said recommended. Caleb released him. The system lied once. It is an exam. So is a scam. That sentence went straight through the overhang and into my bones. Outside, the predator call sounded again, closer now, but the echo was wrong. Caleb tilted his head. Speaker is north. Movement is east. Professor Voss, watching from the observation chamber, must have heard him, because Sentinel-9 immediately updated the weather. The rain thickened. Fog rolled low across the ground. The stone shelf beneath us gave a subtle tremor, a terrain disruption designed to make us abandon shelter before we had a plan. Several cadets flinched. Caleb did not. He pulled a loose emergency cord from the exam kit strapped to Brack's belt, tied one end around a root, then tossed the rest to me. Hold this. If the ground shifts, nobody runs blind. I caught it without arguing. That surprised me almost as much as everything else. Caleb crawled to the edge of the overhang, stayed below the fog line, and watched the east slope. It is hurting us, he said. Predators do that? Soren asked. Caleb's eyes stayed on the rain. Bad ones chase. Smart ones shape choices. The words were quiet, but the shelter heard them like thunder. Brack swallowed. And what do humans do? Caleb looked back at us then, rain on his face, mud on his sleeve, calm as winter. We notice. Caleb Walker moved when the simulator expected everyone else to run. That was the difference. Sentinel-9 pushed fog into the shelter, shook the stone shelf, brightened the false beacon, and made the predator call echo from 3 directions at once. It was a beautiful trap if you were the kind of species that trusted instructions under stress. Brack was not stupid, but he was trained to win visible challenges. Soren was not weak, but he was trained to follow ranked signals. I was not helpless, but I was trained to wait for authority to explain what danger meant. Caleb had been trained by Earth, which apparently meant assuming the world was lying until proven otherwise. He took the emergency cord from my hands, pulled it tight once to test the root anchor, then pointed to the back of the overhang. We go low. Single file. No stepping where water shines. Brack frowned. Why? Loose mud reflects smoother. You can see that? Caleb looked at the ground. You cannot? Nobody answered. We followed. That was the real power shift, not when he found the shelter, not when he ignored the beacon, but when Brack Thalen, top survival score in our class, ducked his head and stepped exactly where Caleb told him to step. The human led us through a narrow crawl beneath tangled roots, then down a stone channel half hidden by rainwater. The fog stayed above us. The predator calls stayed behind us. Every few yards, Caleb stopped and touched something: bark, mud, stone, a broken branch, a trail of water running the wrong way. Each time, he adjusted our direction before the simulator could close the path. Sentinel-9 did not like that. We heard it in the wristbands. Participant group deviating from projected route. Rebalancing hazards. The ground ahead trembled. A line of stones shifted, blocking the channel. Soren muttered something about unfair adaptive design. Caleb studied the rocks for 2 seconds, then turned left into what looked like a wall of thorny brush. This way. Brack stared. That is not a path. Caleb pushed one branch aside, revealing a dry gap underneath. Animals make paths before maps do. We crawled through, wet, cold, and extremely humbled. On the other side, the storm weakened for half a breath, and I saw the simulator's forest differently. Not as chaos. As information. The wind bent grass away from open ground. Water pointed toward low places. Sounds bounced wrong off fake cliffs. Caleb was not guessing. He was reading. Then the system tried something crueler. A voice called from the fog, high and frightened, sounding exactly like one of our classmates. Help me! I am stuck. Soren moved first. Caleb caught his wrist. No. Soren's face tightened. That could be real. Caleb listened, eyes narrowed. The voice came again, too even, too clear through rain that should have shredded it. It is placed ahead of the echo, he said. Not a person. Speaker lure. Brack looked sick. You are sure? Caleb's answer was immediate. No. That is why we do not rush. He picked up a small stone and tossed it toward the voice. The fog flashed blue as a harmless restraint field snapped shut around empty air. Sentinel-9 went silent for 3 full seconds. Then our wristbands chimed. Lure avoided. Human response pattern outside expected parameters. Caleb wiped rain from his eyes and kept walking. Expected is how traps eat you, he said. The simulator stopped pretending after that. Until then, Sentinel-9 had treated us like students taking an exam. Cold rain to test endurance. False lights to test judgment. Sound lures to test discipline. Terrain shifts to test balance. But Caleb Walker kept stepping around every lesson before the system finished teaching it, and artificial intelligence, I learned, can become offended without having emotions. The forest darkened. The rain turned harder. The false thunder rolled closer until the ground trembled through my boots. Then every beacon vanished at once. No orange extraction marker. No blue secondary signal. No helpful path. Just black trees, gray fog, and Caleb standing at the front of our small soaked group as if someone had finally removed the distractions. Brack whispered. Now what? Caleb held up one hand. Quiet. Nobody argued. That was new. The quiet kid had taken command without raising his voice, and the strongest cadet in our class was waiting for him to listen to Rain. Caleb closed his eyes. I thought that was insane for approximately 2 seconds. Then I realized he was separating sounds. Water on leaves. Wine through rock gaps. Mud sliding under pressure. Our breathing. Something large moving where it wanted us to think nothing was moving. His eyes opened. It is not hunting us. Soren looked into the fog. That sound says otherwise. Caleb shook his head. It is driving us. Toward what? I asked. He pointed downhill, where the fog looked thinner and safer. Bad ground. Sentinel-9 chose that moment to prove him right. The slope below flashed faintly under the mud, a hidden restraint field waiting for panicked feet. Brack stared at it, then at Caleb. Respect is strange when it appears on a face built for arrogance. It looks almost painful. How did you know? He asked. Caleb crouched and touched the wind-bent grass. Everything wants us downhill except the water. That sentence should not have made sense. It did anyway. Water was running sideways across the slope, avoiding the low ground like it knew a secret. Caleb stood and looked uphill instead, toward a dark ridge lined with narrow stones. We climb. Soren gave a weak laugh. Away from extraction? Away from the trap. And the predator? Caleb looked toward the moving sound in the fog. It will not follow. If it knows we are not prey. I felt my throat tighten. How do you convince a simulator predator of that? Caleb pulled the emergency cord from Brack's belt, tied 3 loose strips of reflective fabric to it, and strung it between 2 branches at chest height. Then he snapped a dead branch in half, not loudly, but with a dry, deliberate crack, and placed it upright in the mud like a marker. Brack watched, baffled. What is that? Caleb stepped back. A line. A line does not stop anything. Caleb's eyes stayed on the fog. No. But crossing one means something. The simulated predator reached the edge of the trees a moment later. We never saw all of it, only a low shape moving behind rain and shadow, built from light, sound, and every fear Sentinel-9 thought would work on us. It stopped at Caleb's marker. Its head tilted. The system tried to push it forward. The thing did not move. For 5 full seconds, the predator simulation stared at the quiet human and chose another path. Sentinel-9's voice cracked through our wristbands, less smooth than before. Behavioral anomaly detected. Predator model declining engagement. Caleb exhaled once. Good, he said. It has manners. The predator simulation turning away should have ended the exam's confidence. Instead, it made Sentinel-9 desperate. The wristbands all flashed red at once, and the rain stopped for half a second, not naturally, not like weather changing, but like a machine taking a breath before deciding to cheat. Then the forest rearranged itself. Trees shifted behind the fog. Stone ridges folded inward. The slope we had climbed became a narrow corridor between wet black walls, and somewhere above us the artificial sky flickered with pale emergency light. Brack looked up and whispered, "It is changing the map." Caleb Walker did not look surprised. Good. Soren stared at him. Good? Changing costs processing, Caleb said. Processing leaves gaps. That was when I understood the horror of what the system had realized. Caleb was not just surviving hazards. He was making the exam reveal how it thought. Every time Sentinel-9 moved the world, Caleb watched the seams. Every trap became a clue. Every correction became a confession. Professor Voss's voice finally cut through the observation channel, sharper than before. Sentinel-9, maintain standard difficulty parameters. The system answered too quickly. Standard parameters insufficient for human subject. Nobody in the simulator spoke, but the silence around us became enormous. Brack heard it. Soren heard it. I heard it. Caleb only wiped rain from his eyes and started walking uphill again. Stay left, he said. Rock face is real enough. Right side is theater. We stayed left. The right side collapsed into harmless blue static 3 steps later. Brack made a small sound that might have been respect trying to escape without permission. The ridge opened into a clearing where the extraction marker finally appeared, bright white this time, 30 yards ahead. It looked perfect. Dry ground. Clear path. Calm air. A victory painted by someone who had studied what desperate students wanted and forgotten. Caleb was not desperate. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. No, Soren nearly groaned. That is the extraction point. Caleb nodded. Looks like one. It has the academy code. So did the beacon. Brack stepped beside him, no longer mocking, just tense. What do you see? Caleb pointed to the grass. It stood still. All of it. In a storm that had been bending trees sideways for 20 minutes, the clearing did not move. No wind, he said. No runoff. No insect noise. No echo. It is too clean. Sentinel-9 remained silent. Somehow that proved him right. Caleb knelt and opened the small exam kit clipped to his belt. Inside were emergency wire, a heat tab, reflective tape, and a signal patch. He stripped the wire, wrapped it around the heat tab, pressed the signal patch to a flat stone, and slid the whole thing across the ground into the clearing. For 2 seconds nothing happened. Then the fake extraction marker flickered, shifted, and vanished. Beneath it, the floor glowed with a containment field wide enough to catch the entire group. Sentinel-9 spoke in a lower tone. Advanced trap detected. Caleb stood. Yeah. By participant Caleb Walker. Caleb looked toward the ridge beyond the false clearing, where a narrow break in the rocks had opened when the fake marker failed. There is the real path. Brack followed his gaze and said nothing for once. We moved through the gap single file, and the storm weakened with every step, not because the exam was getting easier, but because Caleb had run it out of lies. At the top of the ridge stood the true extraction gate, dull gray, unlit, almost invisible unless you had stopped trusting shiny things. Caleb touched the panel, and it opened. We stumbled out into the observation chamber soaked, muddy, cold, and alive. Caleb looked at Professor Voss, then at Sentinel-9's red displays, and asked, Was that supposed to be the hard part? The observation chamber did not applaud when we came out. It could not. Applause requires everyone to agree on what just happened, and for several seconds nobody did. We stood dripping rainwater onto the polished floor while Sentinel-9 filled every display with red diagnostic warnings. Brack leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his uniform streaked with mud and his expression rearranged into something close to humility. Soren kept staring back at the simulator door like it might reopen and ask for a rematch. Professor Halloran Voss held his tablet in both hands, but he was not reading it. He was looking at Caleb Walker. So were all of us. Caleb looked smaller outside the storm, which made no sense. 5 feet 10 inches, pale skin, soaked academy jacket, mud on his sleeves, one bootlace half loose. Nothing about him screamed danger. Nothing about him demanded attention. That was the problem. The exam had not made him impressive in the obvious ways alien species trusted. It had not revealed hidden claws or a secret warrior caste or some dramatic Earth ritual. It had only removed the classroom. It had taken away bright lights, neat desks, polite rules, and the comforting lie that quiet means harmless. Sentinel-9 spoke at last, its voice lower than usual. Final assessment incomplete. Standard scoring model invalid. Professor Voss blinked. Invalid? Human subject did not follow participant survival behavior. Caleb frowned, genuinely confused. I survived. The system paused, as if offended by the simplicity. Correction. Human subject did not behave as prey, competitor, or escape-focused participant. Human subject demonstrated environmental counter-analysis, hazard pattern disruption, non-standard group preservation, and adaptive distrust of system-provided safety cues. Brack turned slowly toward Caleb. Adaptive distrust? Caleb shrugged. My uncle used to say never trust a shortcut in the woods. No one laughed. Professor Voss stepped closer. His formal evaluation coat was dry and immaculate, which suddenly made him look less prepared than the students covered in mud. Mr. Walker, he said carefully, where did you learn these methods? Caleb wiped water from his face with one sleeve. Camping. Storm drills. Search and rescue weekends. My mom made us hike in bad weather so we would not panic in worse weather. Soren stared at him. That was childhood training? Caleb thought about it. Mostly family trips. Sentinel-9 flashed another warning. Reclassification required. Caleb Walker. Species human. Homeworld Earth. Previous profile, low-threat student participant. Updated profile, native Deathworld survival organism. Recommended note, quiet behavior should not be interpreted as fear response. The chamber went silent again, but this time the silence belonged to Caleb. He did not smile. He did not boast. He only looked at the red display and said, I was listening. That sentence stayed with me longer than the storm. We had called him quiet because we thought speech was proof of presence. Earth had taught him differently. On Earth, silence was not absence. Silence was how you heard thunder before the sky opened, how you noticed birds going still before weather turned, how you found water, shelter, danger, and lies wearing the shape of safety. Professor Voss lowered his tablet. The exam revealed your true nature, he said softly. Caleb glanced toward the simulator doors, then back at us. No, he said. It just rained. And that was when I understood. The Deathworld exam had not created a monster. It had created a familiar room. We thought Earth made quiet children because they were timid. We were wrong. Earth made listeners, and sometimes the quiet ones are only waiting for the world to speak first.